St. Francis of Assisi set up what is historically known as the first nativity scene. And in the centuries after that, of course, different players and characters and people set those up in different ways, from wooden figures to live people, bringing together a live nativity. And for the most part, across the centuries since that very first one, many of the players, the characters, the folks involved have remained pretty consistent. You've got Mary and you've got Joseph. You've got the baby Jesus, right? Sometimes you've got some cattle and some donkeys and some sheep. Sometimes our nativity scenes are even historically inaccurate, as we include the wise men who weren't there, right? But that's okay. It does remind us that Jesus is a king and that Jesus is worthy of worship when we include them. But there's one player that I would venture to say that you've never, ever seen in a nativity scene. And my hope is that after this series that we're calling The War on Christmas, that you'll go out and you'll buy a dragon, and from here on out, there will be a dragon in your nativity scene. Because guess what? He belongs there. Though hidden and unseen, there was a power at work when Jesus was born that sought to devour him and destroy him. And that's the story that the Apostle John tells in Revelation chapter 12. Now, if you want the historical account of the birth of Christ, you need to go to the Gospel of Luke. But if you want a behind the curtain, behind the scenes account of what the birth of Jesus meant and what its significance was and is, you need to turn to the book of Revelation. Now, real quick, before we dive into Revelation 12, I want to give you 3 very simple rules for reading Revelation, okay? Number 1, from beginning to end, it's about Jesus. All right? At the very beginning of the book, it starts this way: the revelation of, or about, or from, or through Jesus Christ. So it's about him from beginning to end. Number 2, and I hope to show you this over the next several weeks. In order to understand the revelation and the symbolism that's found throughout the book, you don't need a newspaper. You need your Bible. You need your Bible. So it's very important as we read through these passages that we're always thinking, now where have I seen this before? Because what John's doing in Revelation is he's bringing back up and reusing, almost recycling images specifically from the Old Testament. And so as we step into it today, I want you to begin to think, now where have I seen this before? And then finally, remember, this is a book for us. This is a book for our encouragement. This is a book that ultimately reminds us, when we push past all of the difficult symbolism, Jesus wins. That's it. That's what it's about. Jesus wins. Okay? So having said that, let's dive in, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 6 today. And a great sign appeared in heaven: a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Father, I pray that as we dive into this chapter of your word, that today and in the weeks to come, as we come at the Christmas story from a different angle, that we would be deeply encouraged by what our King, the Lord Jesus, has done. That we might be more prepared this year to celebrate Christmas because we understand in a deeper way the significance of the arrival of the Messiah. Help us now as we dig into these verses to discern truth, to take truth, to apply truth to our lives, but more importantly, to live into the great story that's here, the story of Dragon Slayer. Help us, Holy Spirit, in Jesus' name, amen. Now, in this Christmas story that you've probably never heard before, there are essentially three players: a woman, a dragon, and a child. And maybe the best way to dive into this is to simply start at the beginning and kind of look at the characters. Okay, so there's a woman. She's about to give birth. When it comes to the Christmas story, so far, so good, right? Who is she, though? That's the question. Notice how John describes her. She's clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head, she has a crown of 12 stars. Now, key to understanding not only her identity, but understanding the entirety of Revelation chapter 12 is the promise found in Genesis 3:15. So you got to go back to the very beginning of the story to begin to connect the dots between what God wants to say to us here and how we're supposed to understand it. So Genesis 3:15, if you've never read that verse before, it's often called the first gospel. It's really the first instance in all of the scriptures where we get this hint that God is going to do something to fix the problem of sin, right? And this is what it says. This is God speaking to the serpent after the serpent has tempted Eve and Eve has fallen into sin. God said, I'll put enmity between you and the woman and between your offspring and her offspring. He's going to bruise your head and you're going to bruise his heel. So somehow, some way, down through the passage of time, there's going to come an offspring of the woman. And when that offspring of the woman enters the world, the serpent is somehow, some way going to bruise the heel or bring injury to this offspring of the woman. But ultimately, the serpent knows that this one person's going to lead to his demise because what does God say? He's going to crush your head. All right? Now, it's no exaggeration to say that the long story of the Bible is summarized in this promise and in the unending conflict that follows between God and the serpent. Now, before you conclude that this woman is a particular person like Eve or perhaps even Mary, you have to notice what John says. John says that the woman is a sign, right? When you go back to the end of chapter 11, it's like the curtain of history has been opened and John is allowed to look into the heavenly temple, in fact, into the most holy place, and he's seeing a vision. So the woman he sees in the heavens is a sign. So she's not one woman. In fact, the best way to understand who she is once again to go back to the Old Testament. Do you remember Joseph? Joseph, the king of dreams, right? Joseph's brothers didn't like him very much because of the things that he dreamed. Because in his dreams, he was shown to be ruling over his brothers. Well, in one particular dream Joseph had, which you find in Genesis 37, verses 9 and 10, this is what we read. Then Joseph dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, listen, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves on the ground before you?" Now we know that ultimately that dream came true, right? When Joseph became a prince in Egypt. But it's a clue, it's a pointer, because what John's doing throughout the book is he's picking up on this Old Testament imagery, and he's telling us that the sign of the woman here is none other than the children of Israel. This is the Old Testament people of God. This is who she symbolizes. Now, later in the Old Testament, and we don't have time to go through all of these passages, okay, but Isaiah 26 and then Isaiah 66 particularly, and then in Micah chapter 3, the people of God are depicted as a pregnant woman struggling to give birth to the Messiah. And struggle they did, okay? Often in spite of themselves, right? They struggled to bring God's promise to fruition because they themselves were in need of the promised one. That's why there are so many fits and starts in the Old Testament. It's why the thing seems to kind of come to this crashing halt with the exile because of the sin of the people of God. But there's also opposition. The people of God struggled to bring forth the Messiah into the world in spite of people coming against them. But here's what I want you to notice. Notice how John portrays the woman. He portrays her as clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet and on her head a crown of 12 stars. This is the beloved people of God. There's grace in this description because the people of God aren't described as they really were in the Old Testament, right? A wayward, idolatrous, and spiritually adulterous people. No, they're described as God sees them. Because God chose them. They were the apple of his eye. They were his bride. They were his beloved. And they are clothed with creation itself, almost as a queen. And so here are the people of God, struggling in agony to bring the Messiah into the world. Verse 2, she was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. Verse 3, and another sign appeared in heaven. Now here's another picture, okay? Revelation's not, this is another thing to remember. Revelation's not a puzzle book, it's a picture book. Okay? So Revelation contains pictures that are meant to help us understand deeper spiritual realities. So that's what we're going to see next as well. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns on his heads, 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. Now, who is the woman? The children of Israel who have long labored to bring the blessing of God into the world. Remember back in Genesis 12, right? Like God gave Abraham this promise that his family would become great, his name would become great. Through his family line, God would bring what? Blessing upon the world. They were to be a conduit people. That's why God chose them. Now here we find another player. So we know who the woman is. Now what is the dragon? You don't have to look very far. Verse 9 tells us. Look at verse 9 of Revelation 12. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. Now there are several terms there that describe him, right? He's the great dragon, he's the ancient serpent, he's the devil, he's Satan or the accuser, he's the deceiver of the whole world. The serpent of the garden, in other words, and the dragon of Revelation are one and the same character. As a snake, he deceives. As a dragon, he destroys. As a snake, he deceives. As a dragon, he devours. Jesus, in fact, described him with these exact words. Listen to John 8:44. You are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. He's a deceiver and a devourer, a liar and a murderer. It's what the snake and the dragon represent. Now, what does John tell us about this dragon? He's red, which means that he's violent. He has no qualms about shedding blood. He has no qualms about leaving a pile of bodies in his wake. John also tells us that he's great. He's powerful. He's fearsome. He's able to make people quake in their boots because he is awesome. He describes him as having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. Now in the book of Revelation, these numbers, 7, 10, and 7, are all numbers of perfection or completion. And so here's what this means. This means that this dragon expresses God-like claims. God-like claims to knowledge, the heads, power, the horns, and authority, the diadems. So knowledge, power, and authority. And he's immense in size. Look at John's description, verse 4. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. So large, in fact, is this dragon that his tail sweeps across the sky and sweeps away 1/3 of the stars. Now, what does this mean, okay? There are 2 possibilities. Number 1, some people argue that this is a depiction of the fall of Satan from his status as an angel before the Lord. That when he fell, he swept away 1/3 of the angelic hosts with him. Now that's a possibility, okay? But there are only vague scriptures in the Old Testament that point this direction. What I think, after studying it, is a better understanding of this, is the connection here between this verse and Daniel 8:10. There, Daniel talks about a kingdom that grew very, very great and very, very strong. This is what he says. The kingdom, it grew great even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground, and trampled on them. Now, taking that verse and connecting it back to this passage where in the immediate context, the stars refer to the 12 tribes of Israel. I think what John is saying and what the Holy Spirit is saying through John is that down through history, the dragon, through these various empires that have overpowered the people of God, has trampled on them time and time and time and time again. Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Rome. Again and again, the dragon has used empire to trample the people of God. And so that's what he's saying. And if you notice where the passage goes next, verse 4, and the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. Throughout history, the dragon has long stood before the woman, the children of Israel, who are about to give birth, that he might devour her child. Why? Because God's promise that the seed of the woman would be his undoing has haunted the serpent since the garden. It has chased him down through the ages, and it has set him on a relentless quest from keeping this baby from coming into the world. And so throughout history, and we're going to trace just a few steps of this story, okay? The dragon has been crouched before the people of God, devouring her children, that he might prevent God's promise from coming to fruition. By the way, this is why the dragon hates babies. This is why the dragon hates babies. And it's why the sin of abortion is such a hideous, monstrous, wicked, and darkly spiritual thing. It's tangible evidence. And this is hard to hear. It's tangible evidence that our culture as a whole is under the sway of the great red dragon. It just is. But let's go back to the biblical story. So go back with me to Genesis 4. Go back to Genesis 4. All right, Genesis 4. This is right after Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden. And I want you to notice what happens. Genesis 4:1. Now Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Now, have you ever read that and thought about actually what she was thinking in that moment? She was thinking to herself, man, that didn't take God long at all. The snake crusher's already here. I've gotten a male child. The offspring's already come. And not only that, Genesis 4:2. And again, she bore his brother Abel. God's given her 2 little bundles of blessing. Wow, this time outside the garden, this is going to be over way faster than we thought it was. Until you get to Genesis 4:8. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and did what? Killed him. You see, it was Abel through whom God was going to bring the promised snake crusher, or at least the dragon thought that. So the dragon worked through Cain to eliminate Abel. Now, Adam and Eve had a third son, and his name was Seth, and the line continued through Seth. But let's fast forward for just a minute. Slavery in Egypt. Slavery under the oppressive hand of a pagan ruler who actually wore the symbol of a cobra on his headdress. No kidding. Historical fact. Right? A ruler that God directly identifies with the dragon in Ezekiel 29, verses 2 and 3. Listen to this. Ezekiel 29, 2 and 3. Son of man, set your face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and all Egypt. Speak and say, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt. What does it say? What does it say? The great dragon that lies in the midst of his streams, that says, my Nile is my own, I made it for myself. So, the dragon says, I'll send the people of Israel into bondage in Egypt. That'll do the trick, right? Well, I'll take it a step further. I'll kill all the newborn males so that God's appointed deliverer of his enslaved people is snuffed out. Not a problem. Exodus 1:22. What does Exodus 1:22 say? Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born of the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. What's happening? This is more than just the story of the Exodus. This is dragon working behind the scenes to snuff out the promised deliverer. Go ahead to the story of David. David, son of Judah, son of Jacob, son of Isaac, son of Abraham. God tells us that it's through David's specific line that God intends to bring his great hero into the world. Is David safe from the dragon? No, not hardly. David is relentlessly pursued by who? Saul. A son of the dragon, if there ever was one. But David escapes his grasp, not once, but twice. Look at the verses. 1 Samuel 18, verses 10 and 11. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand. And Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I'll pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. And then 1 Samuel 19, verses 9 and 10. Then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with a spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul so that he struck spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Now, lest you think that God is not also at work in this story. Remember David and Goliath? Did you know that if you literally translate the text, Goliath's armor is described as almost being like the scales of a snake? And what does David do? David, this great kingly ancestor of the dragon slayer, he hits the giant serpent where? Here, and he cuts off his what? Head. Do you see the connections? Do you see the connections to what God wants to tell us at the end of the story? If you fast forward yet again, you enter this individual named Athaliah. Have you ever heard of her? She was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. In order to have absolute power, she decides to destroy all the seed of David. Again, the coming of the snake crusher is threatened. At last, the dragon concludes it's done. Or so he thinks. Look at 2 Kings 11, verses 1 and 2. Now, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal family. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being put to death. And she put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Thus they hid him from Athaliah so that he was not put to death. So Jehosheba takes Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and hides him from Athaliah so that he's protected and preserved. Listen, I'm telling y'all, like we read passages of scripture like that in those books about the kings that seem like boring history, but the story is there. The story's there. The unfolding story of redemption. It's all there. Fast forward yet again. The children of Israel are living in a foreign land under Persian rule. And what does the dragon try to do to them in Persia? Read the book of Esther. The dragon tries to eliminate them through a man named Haman. Exactly. Y'all remember. And now finally, we turn the page to the New Testament, to the climax of the conflict, to the height of this back and forth between God and the dragon. And what we find in Matthew chapter 2. Here's a baby in a manger in the little town of Bethlehem. The baby. He's here. The baby's here. But what do we find? We find the dragon still unwilling to give up. So what does he do? He works through a man, a king, a supposed king of the Jews, named Herod. And what does Herod decide that he's going to do in the face of this vile threat from this child? Matthew 2:16. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and he killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all the region who were 2 years or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Does that sound familiar? It should. The dragon knows no new tricks. So he reverted back to the same old trick he had used in the Exodus story. Working through Herod rather than Pharaoh to eliminate the possibility that this king would usurp his throne. Now, who is this child? Who is this child? Turn with me back to Revelation 12. Who said Jesus? Yes, Maylee, you are exactly right. Listen to what John says. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child. Important. Language is important. All right, takes us right back to the promise of Genesis 3:15. Who is this child? Notice the brief description. One who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Now again, I told you that there are Old Testament pictures, allusions, and direct quotes throughout Revelation. This is like a hyperlink, and it takes us right back to Psalm 2. Which is a messianic psalm about the divine king whom God would appoint to rule over the nations. Who do we know that to be? Jesus. Jesus quotes this exact psalm about himself in Revelation 2:27. So here he is, the Messiah. The child has finally arrived at last. This is God's King. Now, I want to tell you something this morning. You and I need this version of the Christmas story. You and I need this version of the Christmas story because it protects us from celebrating Christmas in a way that only produces warm fuzzies. You and I need this version of the Christmas story because it protects us from a kind of cultural sentimentality that can ooh and ah over a baby in a manger or shed a tear every time Christmas Shoes comes on the radio. I hate that song. You know why? Because it's ultimately just sentimental drivel. It has nothing to do with the story of Christmas. Nothing to do with the spiritual reality of the coming of the King of Kings to eradicate the powers of darkness. Now, it's a fine song in itself. Don't send me an email or give me, or try to set me straight, okay? It's okay. It's a fine song. It's a fine song. But I think it's evidence of how we've embraced a cultural sentimentality, almost a nostalgia associated with Christmas. Those warm fuzzies that we think, oh man, I just love the holiday season. Why do you love it? Do you love it because the snake crushers come? Because we're celebrating the birth of the dragon slayer? Is that why you like it? I hope that's why you like it. We need this Christmas story because so many of us have embraced a sentimentality that forgets that the baby in the manger is the rightful ruler of the whole world. Jesus is Lord of all. He's a good and glorious and mighty and gracious and wonderful king, but he is a king nonetheless. And it's oh so easy to look at a baby in a manger and go, oh, how nice, how cute. But a baby can make no demands on you other than change me, feed me, hold me. We forget that that baby also says, your life is mine and I want it. Right? Yes. Thankfully, the dragon failed. Man, we are running out of time, y'all. Gracious. Verse 5. She gave birth to a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Now, this is interesting, okay? Because what John does here is he basically encapsulates the entire life and ministry of Jesus in one sentence. John moves from the birth of Jesus to the ascension of Jesus in one fell swoop, in one brief sentence. Okay, this is the easiest way I know how to explain it. He moves from D-Day, where the troops landed at Normandy, all the way to VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, when the war is over, in just one brief sentence. 1 second, the baby is in danger of being eaten. The next, the baby is beyond the reach of the dragon. Now, what is John teaching us by skipping over the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus? Why does he go straight to the ascension where the Lord Jesus is called up or caught up to the throne of God? Listen, Jesus did not simply sneak off the scene not wanting to cause a fuss. He didn't simply take an elevator up to heaven as if one day he just decided to retire and withdraw from public life. In his absence, it's not as if you and I are supposed to keep our heads down and maintain that warm fuzzy that we've got in our hearts because, well, we've got Jesus there. And it's not as if we're supposed to kind of hold on to Jesus there until we can take the elevator up to heaven too. Jesus is disappearing into the clouds before his disciples on the day of his ascension is only half the story. When he emerged on the other side into heaven, he emerged as the one and only King of everything, to whom all authority was handled. This story, by the way, creates a people, and we're going to see this over the next couple of weeks, okay? This story creates a people who boldly live out their faith in Christ and his gospel, even in the face of hostility. Because who drives all of the hostility toward the gospel? Who drives it? Who drives it? The dragon does. Who's beyond the reach of the dragon? Jesus. If Jesus is beyond the reach of the dragon, you got nothing to worry about from the dragon. It's what Revelation 12 tells us later. Ultimately, this one little sentence reminds us that Jesus is Lord. This is what we declare when we share the gospel with people. And Christmas is a great time. It's a great time to talk with people about the life and the death and the resurrection and the ascension of the Lord Jesus. Friends, we are ambassadors of Christ, bringing with us an authoritative and exciting pronouncement from the King. Each time we do, it's as if we're going to citizens from a foreign country and saying to them, there is a king, and that king claims your allegiance. That king is going to come back, but guess what he's done? He's given a period of amnesty. That king has said, if you will repent and turn from your sins, through my own death and resurrection, you will enjoy forever life with me in my kingdom. And you know what? He throws the doors open and he says, anybody who wants that can have that. But one day that opportunity will come to an end. All you got to do is read Revelation 19 and 20, and you'll understand what it'll be like when that time comes. If people acknowledge the kingship of the Lord Jesus now, they will experience his coming rule as a blessing, as life, and as salvation. If they reject him, they will experience his coming rule as conquest, death, and judgment. If you want to know what that looks like, again, read the rest of the book. Here's the reality. Every one of you in this room has the opportunity to say yes to the dragon slayer today. Today. You might not have it tomorrow. You might not. Finally, as we close out this initial passage, look at the final verse. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now here's what you need to see, and I'll make this quick. The victory of the seed of the woman signals great news for the people of God. Liberation. Liberation. You see, when John tells us that the woman fled into the wilderness after the ascension of her son, he's providing us again with a one-word hyperlink back to an earlier part of the study, the story. He's providing us with this understanding. He's connecting the dots between the deliverance of the Exodus and the deliverance of the dragon slayer. That's the significance of the term wilderness. John says that the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, there are a multitude of interpretations regarding what those 1260 days mean? But I want to show you something. Thinking about the Exodus and about the wilderness and about God's liberation of his people into this place prepared for them where he nourished them. If you go, and we're not going to read this, but I'm going to give you the reference so you can go back and do it for yourself. I did it this week. Numbers chapter 33, verses 1 to 49. In that chapter, God specifically tells Moses, I want you to write down stage by stage everywhere that the people of God went during their wilderness wanderings, all the way from Ramses in Egypt to the plains of Moab across from Jericho. Do you know how many stages there are? 42. 42 from beginning to end. Do you know how many months 1260 days is? 42. Incredibly significant because it points out here that what Jesus did when he rose from the grave and ascended to the throne of heaven is lead forth a new exodus of people now who are no longer held captive by the dragon. People who are no longer held captive spiritually by Satan, sin, death, and hell. Now, what does that mean? It means here we have a reminder. Here we have a reminder, if we'll go back and read the Exodus story, that our freedom in Christ has been won. But wilderness wandering wasn't home for the people of God, was it? What were they waiting on? The promised land. And guess what? You and I are still waiting. We are still waiting for the return of the Messiah. Now, the good news is that this in-between time we're living in, it's only going to last for a predetermined amount of time. God says through John, 1260 days, that's it. A predetermined amount of wilderness wandering time. In the meantime, what does God say? God says to his people that he will protect them, that the time they're living in is a place prepared for them, and during that season he will what? Nourish them. He will nourish them. Right here, right now. Right here, right now, God is protecting, providing, and nourishing. And you and I are waiting. We're waiting for what? We're waiting for the return of the dragon slayer, the promise of resurrection, the promised final defeat of death, and the final destruction of the dragon. You see, Advent is intended to remind us that we're not only looking backward at a baby in a manger. Advent is intended to remind us that we're looking forward to the King's return. Not as a swaddled infant, but as a glorious and victorious King. Right here, right now, we wait. We wait, trusting that Christ is here with us, that here is exactly where he wants us to be, and that in this place and during this season, he will nourish us. He will guide us. He will lead us, even as the dragon sets his sights on us. And trust me, when we go through the rest of the passage, that's what you're going to see. The dragon can't have Jesus, so what does he do? What does he do? I'm going to go after his people. And he's been doing that for 2,000 years. Let's pray. Father, thank you